So we have the White-Red Prison deck here. This is a deck that has been actually gaining a lot of popularity recently, been putting up results in opens and classics, and just seeing it pop up online as well. I've been playing it personally for a little while now, and you can do some pretty messed up things in the modern format. So just some of the hate cards are devastating, especially in certain matchups, and they can give you a lot of free wins. The mana base, it's straight white-red, so you've got a bunch of planes. I think you want at least 8 planes, so this is the minimum amount because you do have Blood Moon. So you need a lot of basic planes because you have a bunch of double white cards, and you also have Blood Moons in your deck. So bunch of planes here, some different red and white duels. So there's a Needle Spires, there's a Cliff Top Retreat, there's a couple of Rugged Prairies, Temple of Triumphs. So temples are really nice because they allow you to scry, and sometimes you're digging towards 1 or 2 specific cards. So the scry is really nice off of those. And then there's, of course, Sacred Foundry because there's 4-hour mesas. You need to be able to search up Sacred Foundry or a basic. There's 1 Cycle Land. It's off color, but sometimes it does come up where you want to cycle it. And then if you're on the draw, these Gemstone Caverns can be pretty nice because they're basically a Simian Spirit Guide built into a land where it just jumps you ahead in terms of being able to play that Chalice or that Blood Moon or that Nahiri a turn earlier, and that's a big deal with this type of deck. So the deck does play some early spot removal. Blessed Alliance is really good in certain matchups, like against Death Shadow or Infect, or decks without very many creatures, but creatures you care a lot about. And maybe your opponent has some sort of protection spell, and you're able to get around it with this Blessed Alliance. It's also life gain against the aggressive decks like Burn or Zoo. Journey to Nowhere. 2 mana spot removal. It's kind of annoying because it's an enchantment, so your opponent can actually just destroy an enchantment to deal with it. But it's nice because it's 2 mana. 1 copy of Rest in Peace. This card may look a little bit weird, but this deck is a lot about having high impact cards, and some of them they don't do anything in certain spots. Rest in Peace is one of those cards that it may not do anything, but when it's good, it's really good. And there's a lot of matchups that care about their graveyard a lot. This deck does not care about its graveyard, as opposed to lots of other decks in the format. So there's 1 Rest in Peace main, 3 in the board. And if you ever draw a card that just doesn't do anything in a certain matchup, you can always loot it away with Nahiri. So lots of high impact spells. Lightning Helix. A lot of lists have 4. I'm actually down to 3, but it's a nice versatile life gain / burn spell. 4 copies of Simian Spirit Guide. So Simian Spirit Guide helps you accelerate out these early Blood Moons, these early Chalice of the Voids, these high impact cards that I'm talking about. Blood Moon, in certain matchups, it just wins you the game. Same thing with Chalice on 1. Most often, you want to just play Chalice on 1 if you can. There's a lot of decks that have lots of 1 mana spells. This deck does not have any, so it's making the Chalice of the Void on 1 as good as it possibly can be. And then sometimes you'll play it later in the game on 2 or what have you, but most of the time you want to just play Chalice on 1. So there's also some sweepers here. Anger of the Gods is one of them. So this one exiles creatures. We're seeing more cards like Voice of Resurgence, like Kitchen Finks pop up. So the fact that you can exile your opponent's threats, and this is a 3 mana Wrath effect, it's good against Dredge as well, taking out cards like Prized Amalgams. So 2 copies of Anger, only 1 copy of Wrath of God in the main, because I do think Anger is a little bit better in general. It's also 1 less mana. So There's a bunch of Planeswalkers in the deck, which is how you close out the game. So this is one of the new ones. This is a new card here from Amonkhet, Gideon of the Trials. So before the deck was mostly 4 and 5 mana Planeswalkers. Now you have a 3 mana one that, if you play it on turn 3, it can be pretty good. It's not necessarily as powerful as the other cards, but it's about the curve. And if you are able to, say, pressure an opposing Planeswalker with it, or just shut down a threat while you get maybe another Planeswalker onto the table. So it's pretty effective. Then on 4 we have the signature Planeswalker of the deck, and that is Nahiri the Harbinger. So Nahiri, it does it all for you. It loots, which is huge, because this deck wants to loot badly. Lots of times you have dead cards in your hand, cards you really don't want. So the loot is almost just like a free draw step, or an additional card. Then the -2, it can get rid of the tapped artifact that doesn't come up that much, but enchantments, there's plenty of decks that have enchantments, but the biggest part of that effect is to exile a tapped creature. And then the -8, you can get to it pretty fast. You see here, Emrakul the Aeon's Torn, that is the win condition with Nahiri. You just -8, get Emrakul the Aeon's Torn. It comes in with haste. Attack with it. Your opponent has to pay for the Annihilator, and that's generally almost always going to be the game at that point. So there's another new card here, Cast Out. It's basically a versatile Oblivion Ring. So it costs 1 more mana, but it has flash and cycling. So sometimes this deck just wants to draw lands. You can cycle this for a land. So I like the versatility here a little bit more than Oblivion Ring. And then 1 copy of Chandra, Torch of Defiance. Another Planeswalker here. Can kill things. You've seen it before in Standard. Gideon Jura is more powerful than Gideon of the Trials, but it is 5 mana. It's got a similar effect to Nahiri in that you can -2 to get rid of a tapped creature. Elspeth is the most powerful Planeswalker, but it's also the most expensive one. So there's 1 main, 1 sideboard. And speaking of the sideboard, we've got more high-impact cards in the sideboard. So you'll see lots of enchantments here. More Rest in Pieces. 4 copies of Stony Silence for Affinity and Lantern. Not great matchups game 1, so you really want to be relying on Stony Silence. And you even bring these in against Tron. You bring them in against Ad Nauseam. So you bring them in a number of other matchups as well. The Helix comes in against aggressive decks. Anger of the Gods is a sweeper that you'll know when you want a sweeper like Anger of the Gods. Rule of Law, it's actually great when it's good. So it's great against Storm. It's great against Living End. Wrath of God, an additional copy comes in most mid-range matchups with lots of creatures. Leyline of Sanctity. Similarly, it's against decks with discard. So those are typically the mid-range decks. And then an additional copy of Elspeth. Sometimes you just have cards in the main deck that you don't want, and Elspeth is a pretty flexible option to sideboard into. So this is my list that I've been quite happy with, and I'd like to showcase it off today.